Hello, welcome to EDP at COP26 review session. It's a pleasure for me to host this conversation. A month after the 2021 United Nations Climate Change Conference that took place in Glasgow, it is now important to think and discuss on the actions and measures that can be implemented, but also understand what is happening in the global political framework and what can influence the decision-making of companies. Before that, here is a short summary about COP26 from one of our guests. We will share now a video by Madalena Lucas from our Sustainability Department, where she gives us an excellent background on this topic.
For nearly 3 decades, almost every country on Earth has been gathering for annual global climate summits, also known as COPs, or Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Since COP1 at Berlin 1995 to COP26 this year, participation has grown from 3,000 to over 40,000 participants from all over the world. In that time, climate change has gone from being a fringe issue to a global priority. On a personal note, from someone who has been working on energy, climate change, sustainable development matters for the past 17 years as an attorney, then in the public sector and now at EDP, I see that climate change and energy matters have always been interesting and challenging. For the past few years, however, their relevance has grown like never before, in particular in public attention and business engagement. Originally scheduled for 2020, but delayed by the pandemic, COP26 was finally hosted by the UK in partnership with Italy, the first 2 weeks of November in Glasgow. COP26 had a unique sense of urgency attached. Scientifically and even politically, 2021 was being described as humankind's last chance to take meaningful action to tackle climate change. So the presidency of COP26 had 4 main priorities. Mitigation, secure global net zero emissions by mid-century and keep 1.5 degrees within reach. Adaptation, signaling commitment to ambitious adaptation and resilience efforts. This means protect communities and natural habitats from climate change impacts. Finance, unlocking financial support for vulnerable countries, including making good on the $100 billion a year climate finance commitment, with financial institutions playing also their part. And collaboration, working together to deliver the so-called Paris Rulebook, where no voice or solution is left behind, and re-engaging with observers in a unity of purpose. The aim of COP26 was also to address critical issues such as the role of nature in the climate crisis and making coal an energy source of the past. On COP26, it did not start easy. There was absence of key senior leaders from China, Brazil, Saudi Arabia at the World Leaders Summit. And the announcement, natural determined contributions, they are the voluntary commitments of the countries, they were pointing out to an increase of a global temperature well above 2 degrees. But during the 2 weeks of negotiations at COP, a high number of announcements and alliances brought hope by demonstrating acceleration of climate action, and that a race to net zero is definitely on. There were very important new sectorial commitments, including on methane, coal phase-out and just transition, on clean technology innovation, on zero-emission vehicles, forests, investments. There was an unprecedented convergence between and climate ambition from non-state actors such as businesses, investors, cities, regions. On investments in particular, the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero announced that it would unlock $130 trillion of private capital to fund the green transition. And other announcements as well, including the one from the Race to Zero Energy members, where EDP is included, committed to reaching 750 gigawatts of renewables by 2030. The agreement reached at COP26, the Glasgow Climate Pact, is a significant commitment from more than 190 parties. and despite some disappointments, mainly on finance and solidarity to vulnerable countries and communities, final language on coal, it is an important step in the right direction. It does not solve global warming, but it maintains the objective of trying to limit the global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees and makes a range of progress in the critical areas of mitigation, adaptation and finance. It encourages a revision of current climate targets by 2022 instead of waiting for several years to have this revision. For the first time in the history of the UN Climate Convention process, there is a mention to phase down coal. It invites the parties to consider additional actions by 2030 on non-CO2 emissions, including methane. It sets up a process on the global goal on adaptation, and while urging countries to fully deliver on the $100 billion a year commitment, it also urges them to double the provision of climate finance for adaptation to developing nations. It agrees on a forward process for higher levels of climate finance, including for loss and damage, which is a topic developing countries have been talking about for a decade. It also emphasized the current decade is crucial in terms of reducing emissions. It recognizes the critical role of nature in keeping 1.5 within reach, encouraging governments to incorporate nature into their national climate plans, and also recognize the role of youth and intergenerational dialogue. COP26 also finalizes the Paris Rulebook after 6 years of intense negotiations and provides the basis for the functioning of carbon markets. One can say that after this COP, two parallel processes are now established. Formal convention negotiations, where decisions are formally taken, and the COP Action Hub or global arena, with emphasis on the several alliances and multi-stakeholder announcements, and both are crucial in solving the climate crisis. So why does this matter to business? This COP was probably the one with most participation from different businesses, organizations, industry sectors, and investors. And the truth is that achieving net zero societies and the Sustainable Development Goals will be extremely challenging. And we need the involvement and concerted effort of countries, cities, private sector, academia, civil society, that are supported by increased technological innovation and significant policy reforms. The major international sustainability forums and dialogues, as this year was the high-level dialogue on energy and now COP26, are very important milestones for businesses, as they can help build confidence among peers and governments, encouraging them to raise their own level of ambition and leverage multi-stakeholder partnerships, adequate policies, and financing that are needed to deliver progress. Business can also convey to governments what they expect as outcomes, as well as policy decisions that will drive action in the real economy towards net zero products and services and solutions. And business can also anticipate the main trends in terms of policy, regulation, and other important decisions and initiatives that may impact their own operations. Global average temperature could be as high as 2.7 degrees, with significant risk to human life and high economic cost. So this makes it clear that COP26 delivered direction with future implications, risks and opportunities for businesses. So, what about EDP at COP? We mainly intended to demonstrate business leadership and positioning in important policy conversations, to push for ambition across key international moments using business networks such as WBCSD, UN Global Compact, Women Business, Sea for All and others, and advocating for adequate policies, and decoding the negotiations, anticipating policy trends and business action in specific topics. We naturally did some pre-work. We have been participating in several international programs and events, the UN Global Compact Private Sector Forum, the High-Level Dialogue on Energy, the pre-COP26, as a preparation towards the COP26. On the run-up to the COP, we also supported specific initiatives mostly as they were in line with our business strategy and the COP presidency priorities. 3 examples: a women business letter of corporate leaders to the G20, calling for greater climate emissions ahead of the COP. And 2 UK presidency COP26 led initiatives: a global call to clean power transition statement on accelerating the transition to renewable energies and the abandon of the use of coal, and the Glasgow Accord on zero-emission cars and vans, calling for all new cars and van sales to become zero-emission vehicles. Internally, we held coordination meetings with several EDP group business units and departments since September. We prepared a policy ask guide focusing on raising ambition to 1.5, energy transition, the closure of coal-fired power station and the just transition, access to energy, electric mobility, adaptation, climate finance, carbon markets, and Article 6, system transformation and partnerships. At COP26, we had an extensive agenda through the 2 weeks of the summit, with several meetings, speaking opportunities on relevant events, and meeting with the most relevant climate stakeholders. We highlighted EDP's business strategy with a particular focus on the energy transition through the end of coal, the role of renewable energy, and the renewable hydrogen, and the future of electric mobility. The outcomes of COP26 and our participation confirm that our strategy is ambitious and in line with the energy and climate goals. But it also showed us that we are a relevant partner in the global sense at the most important international climate negotiations.
Now, and before starting the discussion, it is important to introduce our speakers. Madalena Lucas, Head of International Policy and Institutional Relations from our Sustainability Department. Hello, Madalena.
Hello.
We have already André Fernandes, Head of Investor Relations, PNC and Sustainability at EDP Renewables. Hello, André.
Hi, hello everyone.
And Carlos Del Rio Casado, Climate Change Director at EDP Spain. Hello, Carlos.
Hello to everyone.
Thank you all for your presence here. I remind everyone that are seeing us that you can participate. You can share your questions in the meeting chat. In a little while, we will look at all the questions and try to address all those issues. Now, I'll start with Madalena. And after this interesting video, you already talked about your personal perspective, Madalena, and from someone who has been present in 10 COPs, I think it's important to listen to you and to know what it's like to be on the other side. What can you tell us about the feeling of participate in a COP?
Hello, everyone, again. I think you've heard a lot on my side already, and some personal takeaways also. What I would say is that when I was mentioning the difference between the first COP and this COP, and the fact that we didn't reach an agreement, and that at this COP, the positive side is that actually there is an agreement with a certain kind of progress in critical areas. That is very positive. Also, one COP is not meant to solve climate change, but is meant to build blocks. It's meant to organize all the critical areas for all parties, and we're speaking about 197 parties, and to get a consensual commitment around that, and that this COP has achieved. And my first experience was at a COP that was a total failure. And that was very impactful to me, because since then, every COP, in particular the COP15, where countries agreed on the Paris Agreement, and they agreed that they would reduce emissions to stop climate change and stop global temperature to rise to well below 2 degrees, and an effort to get that limit to 1.5. They also agreed to adapt societies and to make money available for that. And since then, we have been working hard on having the blocks every year. Each COP has to improve on those blocks so that it will be possible to deliver that Paris Agreement climate goals. We're seeing that is very difficult, and to be very honest, for me it was I had mixed feelings during the COP, because the two main issues are the emission reduction and also the finance. And in both areas, when we got to the COP, we were really far away of achieving the ambition that was needed. The UN released some reports, and the most recent one showed that emissions were on track to raise 16% by 2030, when they, by the Paris Agreement, they should be on track to fall to 45% that same year. So you can see the difference. And on finance, the developed countries had agreed to finance mitigation efforts and adaptation efforts in developing countries in a sum of $100 billion US dollars a year. And but in 2019, that number was around 80 billion US dollars. So we were failing to deliver on both priorities. But this COP, as I was mentioning, and I'm not going to repeat all those points, it actually delivered progress in a number of issues. The main point that I would signal is this involvement of the private sector. I've never seen such an involvement in any other COP. And I think there was a big work and a big push from the UK presidency of the COP on this particular issue. And we saw the agreement, but then also a number of announcements and sectorial agreements and alliances in specific sectors that are so relevant to bring emissions down and to get the financial flows flowing, actually. So this would be my main takeaway. It's very intense. It's hectic. When you are within a COP, you have information coming from all sides. In corridors, you meet the negotiators, and there are hundreds of side events taking place at the same time. And so it's a very intense moment.
Thank you, Madalena. André, I will ask you, you were also in Glasgow, I know, on a panel about renewables. What can you share with us about that experience, please?
Yes, so this was my first COP, I have to say, so that had a significant catch up to Madalena. It was, I would say, the experience or the feeling I got was of excitement, of consensus, of people wanting to move forward. I fully agree with what Madalena mentioned. We can't expect that we will get ideal outcomes and that everything will be solved in one COP, but it is important to continue to move in the right direction, to continue to build the blocks and reach partial or continue to walk in the right direction and to get compromises and commitments from different parties. Also a point that was mentioned before, the amount of companies and private sector in general in the COP surprised me. Although it was my first COP, I wasn't expecting it to be to have such a big weight from the private sector, and you have there companies from all sorts of types of companies, from startups with new technologies for renewables, for floating, for example. I actually talked to one which was quite interesting, to the big renewable players and utilities and even all sorts of technology. So that was also quite interesting. But overall, the feeling I got was really the excitement and the consensus that that over time it was difficult to get to a wider consensus globally on climate change and all the path that we should be doing together. And the feeling that I got, kind of the first feeling I got, was actually that consensus, precisely, and the excitement around moving forward and everyone contributing to a common goal.
Thank you, André. Carlos, you are an expert on these climate issues and you are representing here EDP Spain. After the COP in Madrid, the last one, how is it to EDP Spain participate in the COP in Glasgow?
Well, I'd like to look back. Madalena mentioned how EDP has been participating from many years, since I think in 2009, and these first roles, quite passive roles, just observers, slowly became very active. I think that in fact in Madrid, in COP25, a real explosion took place in EDP. I mean, because what changed? We became locals. I mean, the main scenario was in our living room, and we've got very good relations with stakeholders. We took advantage of it, and I mean, first role leaders of our company really participate in Madrid, and in COP26 in Glasgow, we just continued with this tremendous work that we did in Madrid, and improved just a few things that were not perfectly tuned. For example, all the things related with communications. In Madrid, for example, we started using the Teams platform, and in quite a local way, we made the company aware of what was happening in Madrid. But here in Glasgow, we used the ESG platform, the ESG community, and the impact was tremendous, I think, because all the people in our company was able to reach this information almost in real time. In Glasgow, we didn't have a favorable scenario. The COP was taking place in the United Kingdom in a post-Brexit era. Iberdrola was there with Scottish Power, was in the center of the room, and I think it was quite difficult for us to find a place to make us a room to talk and to tell the whole world how EDP is doing with the climate change. But I think we succeed, as Madalena mentioned. We did a great effort, and I think we really succeeded. We did a lot of preparatory works, preparation meetings, and not only with the sustainability teams from EDP, Brazil, or Spain, but involving communication colleagues from EDP from the very beginning. And I think the result was really good, and we could participate like André in many important events and panels, and tell the whole world how is our strategic plan for 21-25. How we are going to be coal free by 2025. How are going to be all green in 2030, and everybody should know now how EDP is going to do it. And for me, another message, another takeaway, as Madalena said, everybody's looking to us not only the public sector, but the private sector as well. And now we have 10 years, maybe less, for action. And I think we are entering one of the most challenging periods in our history. It's really challenging, I think. Thanks.
Thank you, Carlos. And all of you already talked about this important role of private sector in this context. EDP's first participations were very individual, as Madalena said, but now our presence, as I could understand, is better prepared and thought out globally. Today we have stopped being reactive and have evolved into a much more coordinated presence. So we have our agenda. How do we prepare it? And Carlos talked a little bit of that now. Madalena, how is to prepare a COP nowadays?
So let me just go back one moment, just to underline why is this so important for business, and just some quick examples, because the video in the video it's also explained. But the fact that this global challenge is so relevant, that is having impacts on legislation, on the measurement and monitoring of climate action that is being promised by countries and by companies. Also on the capital markets. Capital markets is increasingly aligning with net zero, and also stakeholders, our workers, our consumers, our partners, they are all more and more engaged, and our outlook, our strategic outlook has to align with this as well. So this is, I would say, it's a positive reinforcing loop that we have to be in. So businesses, their leadership will provide the confidence for governments to increase their own ambition, but also business can ask governments exactly what do they need so that they can invest in the low carbon and net zero societies. So this is very relevant. We start preparing this. I mean, there is not really a start, because we are all the time and continuously preparing this. But by the beginning of each year, we have this international sustainability agenda for EDP Group, where we have identified the main forums, international forums, events, reports publication, because a lot of reports that may impact us, namely, for instance, on standards and metrics that will imply that we report our targets in a certain way, our operations, our emissions. And so we have this plan since the beginning of the year. And we are participating in several international sustainability organizations or sectorial organizations that are also working on sustainability matters. And here I'm including climate change, naturally. And through these organizations and through this international agenda, we work on specific programs, specific initiatives, specific moments in the international arena. And this is how overall we prepare it, because this influences our strategy. For instance, at COP, we announced a new target for hydrogen by 2030, but it also, we get to influence the dialogues and the discussions. And so we do it on a regular basis and on a year-on-year period of time. So we start identifying what are the main issues for us and what are our priorities to be addressed. And normally they mostly have to do with demonstrating and showcasing our leadership, participating in the most relevant dialogues on the specific areas that are interesting for us, namely, for instance, electric mobility, renewable deployment of renewable energy. And so we identify the topics, but we are also decoding the negotiations that are taking place so that we can anticipate legislation, but also we can anticipate action from our own peers and from other organizations. So we start doing this, we identify the main areas that are critical for us. And then we, of course, parallelly, we are looking at the priority topics for the COP. And this year, the topics were mitigation, adaptation, finance, and collaboration. And so we'll look at how do they fit? How do our priorities fit with the presidency of COP priorities? And that's how we identify our positioning at the COP. And that's how we start building our agenda. This year, and following what Carlos was saying, we followed a similar approach, improved, as we did for COP25. So we organized and we coordinated the positioning of the group, having regular meetings and the representation of people from the different geographies and different units, business units, and corporate departments. Through these regular meetings, we were able to exchange information and exchange our priorities and to build a comprehensive agenda for our participation. This year, I have to highlight the participation of the communication was a plus. It was very good to have the communication building on this journey with us since early September, and I think we had really good outcomes with this involvement, bigger involvement. And looking forward, we will definitely continue to have this approach. We will improve it, so we can count on this coordination for COP27.
André, we already heard Madalena and Carlos about this issue. There is also an agenda in EDP Renewables, I suppose, that helps your participation in this kind of forums. And this is important for your business.
Yes, for sure. So the agenda itself is set at EDP group level, and at the end of the day is covering the different priorities and the different interests of the several businesses in the different geographies. For EDP Renewables in particular, I would maybe just highlight three points that have a direct impact on the prospects for renewables globally. The first one being the net zero commitments. So you have 153 countries updating emissions targets. You have around 90% of the GDP with net zero commitments, and so overall in the short term, and short term meaning until 2030, this leads to a reduction of around 5 billion tons of CO2 emissions by 2030. And so these commitments, they are really important for renewables in general, to the extent that the commitments then translate and drill down into legislations, into more specific targets at national level. In the US, you have that already at state level, but also at federal level. And you have upgraded targets that then need to drill down into legislation, into auctions for renewable projects, into targets for example, for consumers, which will aim to target X% of renewable energy consumption. And so from that perspective, it's moving in the right direction, setting more ambitious goals and giving more demand for renewables globally. A second point is the coal phase out, which is in itself very important in the sense that all the acceleration, so now the coal phase out commitments in advanced markets until 2030 and globally until 2040. You had 20 new countries committing to the coal phase out, and this is capacity, thermal capacity, which is in the different markets, which will be displaced and needs to be replaced by renewables. And so the quicker and the larger the scope of coal and thermal overall, which is phased out. Also, again, it's the private sector, but also the governments and the states need to push for legislation and for targets locally and for auctions which push for that for this commitment and that deliver the commitment. And so again, in the same direction, but also very important, the coal phase out. And then a third topic, which is a little bit broader and not only directly related with renewables, but is the zero emissions vehicles, in terms of pushing for targets that, for example, new cars and vans will be 100% zero emission in leading markets by 2035 and globally by 2040. So all new purchases would need to be zero emissions. This creates a demand in terms of electricity, which is important. And in terms of the overall picture, when you put together electric vehicles with renewables, with storage, with an upgraded electricity grid, this is also a very important point for the overall energy transition, not only specifically for investments in renewables. So overall, I think we have the privilege of being very well positioned as a group for the energy transition. And specifically for renewables, these 3 points are really important drivers, and it's important that we continue to push and that the countries continue to commit to more ambitious targets and to drive the policies into concrete legislation and action plans.
Thank you, André. Previously, this meeting, we had asked for some questions, so I think it's time to look at the questions from our colleagues. I think it will be interesting to see what they asked. I will start with this one. Madalena, if you could answer, what will be the practical consequences of China and Russia meetings absence?
So China and Russia, they were absent from the World Leaders Summit. That's the first part of COP. So COP is more or less divided in 3 parts. First part is where the big announcements are made by the leaders of the countries, of the 197 countries. And then they go home, they stay there for 2-3 days, they go home, and the negotiators take on. And then they are negotiating the texts, and this is the same time where all the alliances and private sector announcements and side events there are happening. Then second week, this is first week, second week, the ministers come, and then they enter into lateral dialogues to achieve agreement on specific points of the texts. So Russia and China leaders were absent from the World Leaders Summit. And this was reason for great disappointment because 2 of the major 5 emitters of the world were not present there. But the fact is, we don't know exactly why they missed it. It's, of course, a clear signal of lack of leadership. But at the same time, these 2 countries, they had presented their national determined contributions. That means their country climate pledges revised. Russia not ambitious, criticized by not being ambitious, but China actually improved its climate pledge. And at the same time, we saw that on the forests declaration that was signed by both countries, the president of Russia actually participated virtually in a meeting on forests. And on the side of China, what we see is that there starts to be a discussion, actually not a discussion, but there starts to there is a conversation at the moment in Beijing about the need to and coal. They actually, although they still have coal in paper, they agree, and they had this bilateral alliance with the US. So they are rivals in a lot of issues, but actually on climate change, they were able to have this alliance where they announced that they would be cooperating to make this transition and accelerate climate action. They didn't exactly said how. They identified that they would be working on energy transition and on reducing of methane emissions, and they said that they would do it this decade. So it's an actual recognition of China that there needs to be work done during this decade. And that, I think, it's quite positive. So the fact that the leaders weren't there, it doesn't mean that the countries were not there, because they were there and they were negotiating and they were part of negotiations.
Carlos, do you want to add something?
Well, I agree completely with all Madalena said. I think it's well.
Okay, so we have some questions about this new carbon market and the opportunities that this could bring. I will read a new question that someone put here. With the current energy market prices volatility, coal power plants appear to be gaining a temporary second life, with the COP26 message towards coal phase-out being one of the biggest disappointments because of its permissiveness. How do you see this impacting EDP's strategy of being coal-free by 2025? It's a long question and a hard one. I don't know who wants to start answering.
Raquel, do you mind if I go to the carbon markets? Because I think it's a very important question.
Of course.
Okay, so I think it's one of the big challenges of fighting climate change is actually the cost, how much it costs. And so carbon markets is actually a way that can help lower the bill, attract investment in clean innovation, and make it possible for the financial flows to go to developing countries where actually the financial flows are needed. And all of this can accelerate emission reduction. So carbon markets is actually a very important topic. And it was fortunate that this COP solved and agreed on the so-called Paris rulebook. It's very technical, but it's actually the rules on how do we implement the agreement set out in Paris. And having closed the Paris rulebook, in particularly the transparency, that means that we now have a framework where countries will be reporting according to certain rules, and that will give credibility to the whole system. Because one of the questions that we normally get is, okay, we have all these pledges, they are voluntary, how do we count them? And how do we know that countries will deliver on them? Well, this makes it quite transparent, and it will make it quite obvious if a country will not be delivering, and we will be able to compare pledges and action from one country to the other, and that's very relevant. On the carbon markets, now we have a basis for trading. We have robust rules, and this is very important not only for countries because it enables them to actually trade credits of carbon between them, but also there was these voluntary carbon markets. They were boosting. They were actually they were being developed really fast, and so companies needed this stability in terms of regulation, because otherwise they would have a complexity in terms of standards, in terms of exactly counting. Also, one key aspect for companies is that, and countries, is that these carbon markets really solve the issue that there is no double counting. So so that emissions are not counted twice in two different countries. And another thing is that it should be, there's now, it's very obvious that we should all consider, actually Laurence Toubiana just said, greenwashing is the latest climate denial. That means that we need to take accountability, everyone, when we commit to something, that we will be delivering it and not just offsetting or not monitoring or not reporting on that. And so it's very important that we now have these rules and that we will be implementing them, having a line of net zero best standards, environmental integrity, and avoid double counting of carbon.
André and Carlos, do you want to say something more about this?
Yeah, I think
Carlos.
No, go ahead, Carlos.
You can go first, Carlos. Then we go to André.
Okay, yes, just to answer one of the questions that was on the table. I'm absolutely convinced that EDP knows where we want to be in 2025. Our strategy won't change. We will be carbon free for sure. Looking long term, I have no doubt. Maybe in short term decisions, we will find things that could seem to be going on the opposite way, but no doubt 2025 will be coal free, and that's a fact.
Okay, thank you so much, Carlos. André?
No, I fully agree, and I was also going to touch on that point. I think we have a very clear vision and strategy until 2025. The current situation, I would say, it's more circumstantial, and it's not something that people in EDP and people in general should see as a change in direction. Not at all. I think it's very clear where we're going, and the company is very committed and aligned to go coal-free by 2025 and to go 100% green by 2030. So I was just going to comment very in line with Carlos.
Okay, thank you so much, André. So we have another one. Someone is asking about coal sites in Spain, so I will read it. EDP has a clear path towards decarbonization, largely driven by coal decommissioning. How is the strategic objective compatible with the opportunistic coal generation exploitation we have been making in a few coal sites in Spain? Madalena, could you answer this one?
So
it's more specific, yes.
Yes, no, so very briefly, I think we all have to recognize that we are living some really challenging times, and that all supply chains are being affected, and specifically on the energy sector, we're being affected by this gas prices. And so what I can say is that as Carlos and André were mentioning, we have a clear target to end coal by 2025, and we don't see that target going anywhere, and so unless being fulfilled. And so I think we at EDP have this very clear and very robust strategy, very aligned with now the Glasgow Climate Pact, very aligned with the high-level dialogue on energy. So we're very aligned with the energy transition. And we are also very aligned with security of supply, with just transition, with the social aspects of all this transition. And so what I would say is that during this challenging time and these supply chains disruption, one word that we have been hearing is resilience, is the word of the year, right? And so I think any temporary decision to make these coal power plants in Spain available, it's temporary, and it will not place our target nowhere near the timeline that we have. It will not. It will maintain 2025, right?
Okay, thank you, Madalena. Another question, will countries take the necessary measures to ensure that they cut emissions by 2030 and keep the global warming target to a maximum of 1.5 degrees? I think it's the question that all of us want to answer. So in your opinion, what's the main priority at the moment? Carlos.
We hope so. All the countries will contribute. If we don't contribute, we will fail. I think first of all of the countries have to collaborate. There are many countries that still haven't published their plans. So I think this is the first step to take. And after that, just we have to observe, and we have to make these objectives to become true. Because if we don't, I don't know what will happen. But the first step is that every country would be compromised and publish their objectives.
André, do you want to say something about this issue?
Yes, I would just add that I think society in general has a very important role here, and to a certain extent, in the past, there wasn't. In the last 5-10 years, there wasn't a lot of involvement from society, but now and in the next 5-10 years, I think it will be a key actor in this decision making and pushing for the policies, and especially also given younger generations are more sensitive to all of these topics, and so it's as we keep moving on in time. At the end of the day, governments are elected by people and by society, and I think society will really play an important role, and a little bit in line with what Carlos was mentioning. We need to monitor and to make sure that as a whole, as a society in general, that things are moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Madalena, do you agree that that society has an extreme important role in this conclusion?
I think we all do, right?
Yeah.
I think companies, cities, I think all actors, what we need to do at this point is such a change to everything from our production to consumption to living patterns, and we need to change it radically. We cannot do it on silos. We need system-based changes, and we need all actors to be together and work together in a collaborative way. I also, there is this current climate gap between all the targets and all the pledges that have been announced and the legislation in place or plans on near-term action to actually deliver on these pledges. European Union, we are at the forefront with the with European climate law and the Fit for 55 package, and European Green Deal, of course, in a more broader sense. But there is a lot to do, and I think that this year the UK presidency will still be in place. COP26 achieved something which is very important. It urges the countries to present new country pledges by next year. So for those who have not increased their ambition, which are several, and for those who have not presented yet their revised national determined contributions, they can do it until COP26, 2027 actually, that will be held in Egypt. But parallel, they need to work on the near action plans to actually deliver on these pledges, and this is very important. And this is also where companies come in, because they can help governments do this.
Mm-hmm. So time is getting short. We are already finishing, but a last question, and you just mentioned now, Madalena, about what we have to do next year in Egypt. There's a lot of things to discuss, but what about EDP? And this question is for all of you. What work is important to do until the next COP in Egypt? André, do you want to start?
Well, I would say more from a business perspective, maybe. I think we need to continue to. We have a very ambitious growth plan, as mentioned before, very clear targets and a very clear path, and we really need to continue to step up and to be an example also in the private sector and kind of a reference. That pushes forward the energy transition as a whole and also renewables, obviously. That let's say on the growth side of the business, and in parallel, we also need to again from a more business perspective to start finding also solutions. For example, the coal plants. There are many projects that are being analyzed of conversion of plants, of a hydrogen as potential solution for some of the sites. So I think we need to start getting more visibility and more clarity on how we will be moving forward and executing the plan and the strategy that we have outlined.
Thank you, Carlos. How EDP Spain will be preparing next year?
Well, I think that we have to keep on working as we were in the past. In Spain, for example, we are now involved in the second adaptation plan, and we have to carry out all the actions we have identified and make them real. For example, working with the carbon footprint, we have to calculate, we have to verify, and we have to take real actions to reduce. And as Madalena said, I think that if all the companies in the world work together and achieve their objectives, we all will succeed and we'll reach our final target.
Madalena, what's your perspective?
So agreeing very much with André and Carlos, I'm just going to build up, so not mentioning what they already said, which I think it's very, very relevant. I think we need to decode all the standards that came, all that is being developed in terms of global metrics and carbon markets and voluntary approaches to achieve net zero commitments. This will need to be decoding during this year. And on a more global level, I would say that we will be working on these aspects, not only internally, but also within the global international sustainability associations and organizations that we are part of. I would say that we also need to push forward and work better the relationship and between businesses and other actors and the climate negotiations, because there will be a point where there will need to be a global stock taking and a global monitoring of all the initiatives that are taking place. So there is concrete visibility on where we are in terms of reducing emissions, adapting to climate change, and in terms of financial flows.
Okay. So thank you all. We really have to finish. Madalena, André, and Carlos, it was a pleasure. Thank you for your important work. And we are very proud of your commitment in this important issue for all of us. Thank you all.
Raquel, can I just, before you go, because I think
Yes.
let me thank all the communications team, because it has been, and all communications team during this COP. It was a great effort, and there wouldn't be so much visibility within the group and outside without them. So we could be preparing all the policy and the positioning and speaking in all these panels, which we have done. But without this coordination that you've done so well, that wouldn't reach our people at EDP and also our other stakeholders.
Thank you, Madalena. Thank you for all the teams that were involved in this COP26. Thank you to all. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.